Okay, so next step after I've thrown my pieces is I have to trim the bottom. So you'll see that there's a little bit of a flare out, it's not neat. If you keep in mind most of your pottery, well, your dishes that you might have at home, mugs, plates, whatever, typically have some type of ring on the bottom. That's called the foot. So I'm going to be showing you how to do two different kinds of a foot. So we'll do a different one for the cylinder from the bowl that we'll do in a minute. I'm going to place this upside down on the wheel. It should be leather hard. If it's squishy, then you need to dry it more, okay? If it's a little bit too dry, then you probably need to wet it down a little. I have to attach this to the wheel using clay. You want to use used clay preferably that is not too hard and not too soft, okay? I'm going to make fat logs. I'm going to curve it a little. I'm going to eyeball my piece as close to the center as I can before I attach it down. I'm going to put my fat log on there. I'm going to push it down onto the wheel. I'm going to do that on 4 sides, 3 or 4 depending. If it's really tiny you might only do 3 sides. The taller it is, the less stable it is, so that's when you need to be a little bit more careful. Bowls tend to not move around quite as much as a taller, skinnier cylinder. Okay, we'll get that on there. Tools that you're going to need ahead of time before you start trimming: a needle tool, a rasp, a loop tool, okay? There's big ones and small ones of these. Typically you want the larger one. You might take the smaller one if your pot's really small. A sponge and a little bit of water. You don't need an entire bucket. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get my wheel spinning. I'm not going to go ridiculously fast, so we're going to go sort of like medium slow. I'm going to take my rasp. The teeth on the rasp only work one way, so you want to make sure that the clay is spinning into the teeth. It's not centered yet, and again I can check that by holding my finger still and seeing that the clay is hitting it and missing it in places. But before I recenter it, I just want to take a little bit of the hairy stuff off the edge. I'm going to do that really lightly, and you'll notice my left hand is just barely touching on the other side so that if it did start to wobble, I could hopefully grab it before it went flying. With the rasp, typically, if you use it right in the middle or in the back, it will kind of drag, and if it feels like it's bumping in your hand, I use the front of it. It tends to run smoother. If your bottom is not flat, you can lightly rasp that as well. Okay, so to recenter this, I'm going to take a needle tool. I'm going to hold it with 2 hands with my arms resting on my legs or resting on the tray. I'm not going to just freehand this because it's going to go all crazy. I also want to point the needle to the right. If I do it this way, the clay is going to spin into the point and really jab it in. I'm putting this down like a record needle. I'm just going to put the needle down. I'm not going to move my hand. I'm just going to let the pot spin underneath the needle. Not going to jab in too hard, and then I stop the wheel. So as you can see here, the line that I made is not directly in the center. So this is wider, this is thinner, okay? What this means is when I'm holding the needle tool, this part is wider. That means that part was closer to my body, okay? And the part where it's skinniest, the space between the line and the edge of the pot is smallest, that part was furthest away. So that means that what it comes down to is wherever your line that you drew is closest to the edge of the pot, you're going to move the whole thing in that direction a small amount, okay? Sometimes you can just push everything all together. If your rim is a little soft, you may need to pull your clay away a little bit. Usually I just grab everything and slide it that way a little bit. re-push down your clay a little to make sure that it's not moving. You can also just put your hand on the top and kind of wiggle a little to make sure it's not going anywhere. So now I'm going to get the wheel going again. Move my pedal a little closer to my foot. I'm going to get a little water. I'm going to squeeze out my sponge to wipe out the line. I don't want to get this sopping wet, okay? So you should not be dumping water all over it. And then I'm going to do another line, and then I'm going to stop the wheel. I'm going to look for where is it closest to the edge. Now it's getting closer, but it's still a little skinnier over here. I found it a little hard to push it, so I'm going to move my clay away a little. And I'm going to wiggle it that way just a little bit. It almost went a little too far, so I just pull it back. You'll notice that I'm really not moving it that much. I mean, if it's really off-centered, you may need to move it a little bit more. It's better to do little increments than to like move it back and forth, like too far one way, then too far the other way, and then you're just going back and forth, back and forth. I'm just going to make 2 lines here. I'm going to stay with the... It's usually easier to tell if it's in a little bit from the edge. So right now, to me, that looks really, really close. So I'm going to hold this, tighten my clay. I'm going to go back to my rasp now, and I'm going to rasp this so that it is completely straight here. So I have a little flare out at the bottom. I want that just to be dead straight. So again, I'm just going to support lightly with my left hand in case it were to grab and pop off. If you get a little raise up, you just take that down. Depending on where yours starts to get wider, you may need to rasp from a little further down. So I stopped the wheel now that I've done that, and I just want to check my circle again and see, once I've rasped that really even, if it's still completely centered. I usually do like overkill and move it when I shouldn't, but it seems a little skinnier on this side, so I'm going to tweak it just a little bit. Sometimes if you're over perfectionist about it, you'll end up having it pretty much perfect and then having to do it over again. But let's see if I did that. Yep. So we'll send it back where it was. Okay, so I'm going to make my line about a quarter of an inch from the outside edge. How thick this is kind of up to you and your personal, aesthetics in terms of how thick you want the foot to be. I'm just going to take a little bit more off of the bottom here. So I'm just removing some of the extra clay so that it's really nice and straight and it's not wide or too heavy at the bottom. Okay. Just gonna smooth that. You can also smooth your rasp tool marks with your sponge, which we'll do when we're finished too.